Hello, sir. Welcome to the CoinGeek Weekly live stream. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I was listening to your intro there, and you mentioned it's a cold snap, and you're wearing a hoodie. About 6:30 last night here in sunny Switzerland, and it was a beautiful sunny day yesterday. We had one of the most violent hailstorms that lasted about
Hmm,
20 minutes that I've ever seen, and
crazy.
when I went out this morning, it had just stripped leaves off the trees. The roads were full of branches and leaves. It was only about 20 minutes, but it was
Yeah.
quite violent. So the world's gone a
Yeah,
bit crazy. And
it sure
by
has.
by the way, cheers. This is how my life is going. I'm drinking water out of a brandy balloon.
You know what? You only live once.
Yeah.
I like it. It's funny. We actually had tornadoes about 20 miles south of me, which is pretty uncommon here too. So same kind of thing. It was really, really hot. Tornadoes overnight. Super
Yeah.
cold for the last 2 days. We're experiencing that climate change situation. It seems like, oh my goodness, is that the way the QR codes are going to look, Alex? No, okay, that was a test in the background. So Stefan, I don't know how many people know you. The first time I ever heard your name, I actually read it in the Satoshi Affair by Andrew O'Hagan, and you were the guy who I didn't know, so I had to look into it at the time. But what's the 60 to 90 second version of who you are in your own words?
I, in my own words, I feel privileged for the history that I have in this industry. Right back in the 2007, 2008 pre-white paper days, through to today. And today I sit here as CEO and executive chairman of TAL, a public company listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange. I'm also the executive chairman of nChain, which is a company that I was involved in founding in mid 2015. And to top it off, I sit on the executive board of the Bitcoin Association for BSV. So to say that, my life is fairly well entrenched in this industry would be a significant understatement. And the three of those roles, none of them are passive. They're all, at times extremely hands-on, probably nChain to a significantly lesser extent than the other two. But, nChain goes through its stages where I am, quite actively involved. So, it's been a wonderful 5 years. It's busy. I wouldn't have it any other way, to tell you the truth. And it gives me a pretty good feel for this whole BSV space, from the development of the protocol, through to the development of platforms and applications that sit on the network that will allow enterprise and business interaction with the network. And then, TAL is the other side of that, which is taking transactions and processing them at high scale. So it's fascinating for me to see the technology develop as it has.
No, absolutely, and you're certainly wearing a lot of hats in the ecosystem. There's a couple others that are similarly entrenched. But you've been up until pretty recently. It seems like a little more of a background figure. Were you purposely not in the foreground? Because it seems like, I mean, you're very happy to talk. You've been on a few shows in the last few months. Was that a decision, or was it just sort of circumstantial?
It was a little bit of both, Kurt. In the beginning, it was circumstantial. I had been approached a number of times, and it's not as if I'm bashful or shy about being on camera, because I'm not. But I spent a lot of time with Craig through 2015, 2016, 2017, and I know how intrusive and cruel the industry can be. It wasn't that I wasn't prepared to shoulder that. I just didn't feel the need to. But I must say that I've certainly enjoyed personally engaging and talking about my experiences in recent times, and I'm happy to do that as long as people want to listen to me.
Well, it's fascinating. I've often said, I ask every guest really, like, what's your Bitcoin story? How'd you get started? And your Bitcoin story seems to have started before there was a Bitcoin, frankly. So you might be impossible to supersede with, well, I got started in, my story starts in 2012 and people tell me I'm an old timer, but I think you've got me beat by 5 years or more. So what was the very first exposure? I know it was a little bit like, what's this white paper? And maybe you didn't have time for it, is what I think you've said in the past, but let's hear that, please.
Well, my discussions with Craig through 2007 and the early and mid parts of 2008 were around, all different varieties of concepts and techniques, whether it be related to security components or economics, economic modeling around digital cash, digital gold, et cetera, et cetera. So, these were highly fragmented discussions. If you have spent a lot of time with Craig, and he's a lot more stable these days than what he has been at times in the past, his discussions are highly intellectual and they're highly fragmented. So, you can sit with him for half an hour and you walk away and you shake your head and say, I got no idea what he was talking about, because none of it seems to flow in terms of concepts linking together. But that was Craig, and I was used to talking to him in those terms, and I never thought much about it until he started to bring things together, and he did come to me with a version of the Bitcoin white paper, which he gave me on a USB stick one day in my office and asked me to read it, and I dragged the file onto my desktop and gave him the USB stick back, but and then ultimately printed that paper out. And one thing I can say, hand on heart, my recollections are that that paper did not have the name Satoshi Nakamoto on it. It either had Craig's name, because I have seen another version with Craig's name on it, or no name at all. But it was at that time, the Bitcoin name had found its way into conversations that I'd had with Craig, and I can say that the paper was very closely worded in recollection to the final paper. It talked about peer-to-peer electronic cash. It certainly referenced it in the form of Bitcoin. And it was something that I read, but it didn't have the impact on me that many other people say that reading the paper for the first time had on them. And I've often questioned myself and wondered why that might be the case. And either others amplify their reactions to what they felt when they read the paper for the first time, but I recall it was no surprise to me, because it was an accumulation of the concepts that he'd been discussing with me for months. So there was nothing revolutionary that he was showing me, apart from proudly giving me or showing me that all these thoughts, ideas, and discussions that we've been having had found their way into a consolidated body of work in the form of a white paper. I often ask myself why Craig was so actively engaging with me on this project. And I've never asked him, but I've always assumed that it was because I was working in the online gaming industry, and Craig had done a lot of work, and a lot of the ideas were closely related to applications for the online gaming industry, because the lifeblood of online gaming is, money in and money out, and peer-to-peer electronic cash, bypassing the banking industry and with low fees and so on and so forth, was, an application that was probably highly valuable to that industry sector. So, that has always been, my thoughts as to why Craig was so actively involved in discussions with me, because he felt that, I would embrace it as an application for the industry and work with it, because, he said a number of times in interviews that he's done that when he launched the code in January 2009, he had no expectations for success. He had no idea whether it would be successful or not. And of course, to make something successful, you need some form of adoption, some use case to be able to demonstrate utility. So I always figured that was probably the reason why he engaged with me in the way that he did. And of course, I've now told the story publicly once before, and there's no reason why I shouldn't talk about it again. In the early part of 2009, he again wanted me to get involved with the project, and bowled into my office one day and brazenly asked me for a $500 deposit, and I just interpreted that as him asking for a loan. And I said, mate, for $500 is not much if you're tight. I'm happy to give you a grand or $2,000. And he said, no, I'm not short. I just want, give me $500 and I'll give you 50,000 Bitcoin. And I said, Bitcoin? He went, yeah, remember. I went, mate, I've already told you, I don't give a shit about that stuff, and I've got no interest. And part of my no interest was not just blatant disregard for what the man had worked hard to pull together and release, but it was, in my working life, I had a lot of responsibilities as CIO of a public company, and
Sure.
we were involved in some transactions at the time that took me into multiple boardrooms with advisors and third parties, where I was doing presentations regularly, and as well as running the business. So playing around with Craig's off the corner of his desk invention was not high on my priority list, sure. And I don't regret it, to be honest, Kurt. I don't regret it, because had I taken a different approach, and had I got involved personally and more actively, I firmly believe that all the things that I work on today wouldn't exist. Lives take completely different paths. You don't cross paths with other people in the way that you do, and I think that where we are today is outstanding and extraordinarily healthy, and it certainly is for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things that always stood out to me, and this is a gotcha that I give to all kinds of people when they ask me about, well, Bitcoin was never supposed to be anything but the store of value. I always say, did you know that the original implementation had a poker game, or the framework for a poker game, pre-programmed into the code? So Satoshi wanted people to perhaps to build this out, and it occurred to me pretty recently, actually, that may have actually been a vestigial piece of code, that maybe he didn't intend for it to grow from there, but maybe it was something that was in there prior. Is it possible that he was building parts of it specifically to show you like a gaming application? Has that ever been discussed?
No, it hasn't been discussed. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. He never sat down to discuss that poker table with me. He has subsequently. He did in 2015 when I was in Sydney working with him in 2015, and I was surprised.